You are experiencing the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is January 28th, 2026, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we are bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region, and we're also bringing you stories from a libertarian or liberty perspective. Today, I tell you, every week it seems like we can't get ourselves out of Minnesota. Something happens that brings us right back there, and so we are going to be talking about immigration issues in Minnesota again. So that's going to fill up most of the show. But we're also going to talk a little bit about the California governor's race and some things that Mr. Swalwell has said. So we'll pry some of that apart as well. And of course, the Preddy shooting is going to be a big focus of the second half of the show, along with some questions about the Second Amendment and just a lot of chaos that's going on there in Minnesota. So anyways, let's get to the show. And before we do that, let me introduce you to our panel. In our to my right, we have Leon the Word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. And my name is Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. We always start out with a Liberty quote of the day. And for that one, I think there's going to be some relation to some of what we're going to talk about a little bit in the show. And it says, if the government becomes a lawbreaker, it breeds contempt for law. It invites every man to become a law unto himself. It invites anarchy. And, I can't think of a worse condemnation of government than when government can't even follow its own laws. And I think we're going to see a few instances of that probably in tonight's show that we can talk about here and there. But it does kind of bring into issue a lot of questions, like when the government selectively applies laws. We lose our faith that justice is blind, I guess, and want this just has to be a contract that we all adhere to. Otherwise, there's just no reason. There's no contract to hold us together, I guess, as a people. Anyways, what are your thoughts on this, Leon?
Well, I've spoken about this very issue before. One of the worst things that could happen in a constitutional republic, as we are supposed to have here, is where the government is tolerating violence and selectively prosecuting lawbreakers. And we saw a lot of that over the last 10, 15 years, I think, where you see the right does something. Look, for instance, January 6th, say for instance, and they went after them. We even had one of the January 6ers right here on our show explaining the hardship that he had.
Patriot Patrick Wohl. So go search for that on knuckleheadsofliberty.com if you want to hear his perspective from January 6th. Go ahead, Leon.
Okay. So that was the January 6th people. They went after them with everything they got. Then we had, I would just say prior to that, we had BLM and Antifa burning down our cities. And I will challenge anybody to tell me how many people have been persecuted because of it. They just only recently found the so-called pipe bomber. And according to what we now know, the Justice Department under Joe Biden had just suddenly stopped searching for the guy. I still want to know why that was the case. But this gets back to the point of selective prosecutions. And this, when the government is doing this is essentially law breaking. Like what we see now going on in Minnesota. Now, yes, people have a right to protest, okay? But they do not have a right to interfere with law enforcement operations. And Renee Good was a very good example of that. She got into an area where they were crying out, where ICE was crying out a law enforcement operation. She have no right. You could call her protester as much as you want. She has no right to interfere with a law enforcement operation. It is a crime, as a matter of fact. So anyway, whatever happened. She ended up hitting one of the ICE agents with a car, and she ended up getting shot to death. And I think it was a justifiable shooting. I think so. Now, I know later on we're going to talk about Mr. Pretty, but there is a lot of things there that should be said that is not being said on the media. And the problem that we are having right now is the media portrayal of these people. Oh, these are just protesters. These are just protesters. Some of them mostly peaceful protesters. But this is not the point. The point is, do they have a right to interfere with law enforcement operations? They don't.
Well,
and this is causing a lot of the chaos.
And I think this goes back to stuff something we've tried to tackle on this show before that I think most people really haven't. And that's the question is, what really is peaceful protesting? And I think we'll probably get into a little bit of that tonight as we're talking, because people claim things are peaceful and, and sometimes they're just not.
Yes.
The best, the best example I like of that is this old CNN clip from the Summer of Love, and it says fiery but mostly peaceful protesting after police shooting. And I mean, this looks like a war zone behind the guy.
Yes.
I mean, if somebody said that we're Palestine behind the guy, and then you tried to say it was mostly peaceful, a lot of people would lose their minds, right? I mean, I'm just saying, right? This is, it's nuts that something like that would be characterized as peaceful or mostly peaceful protesting. And, that's really what we're struggling with here, I think, is, I don't want to short circuit too much of what we're going to talk about later on in the show, because I did want to cover the California issue first. But this is, kind of what we're talking about. But, oh, and by the way, too, I forgot to say who gave the quote, and it's Justice Louis Brandeis of the Supreme Court. And he was a Supreme Court justice around the early 1900s. I think he was appointed by Woodrow Wilson, I think.
I think so too. Yes.
Yeah, and he co-authored an important paper on the right to privacy. So I don't know that I'd agree with him on everything being a libertarian, but but at least on what he said here and what he said about the right to privacy, I definitely think he's on to something.
Indeed.
So anyways, so that's some of what we wanted to talk about. But speaking of weaponizing government, Leon, you know what? Before I get to that, I did want to also mention real quick the Sacramento Constitution Discussion Group. They meet a couple times a month, and if you're in the Sacramento area and you're interested in talking with people who like to talk about the Constitution, this is a local option for you. So just letting you know it's out there. It's at the Epic Bible College, and it's every other Thursday at 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. So and that's out there on Auburn Boulevard, 4330 Auburn Boulevard. So last one was actually kind of an interesting discussion where we talked about the genealogy of liberty, which had to do a lot with things like the Magna Carta and how all that stuff came to be, and how a lot of that goes right into our Bill of Rights. So, really interesting discussion. And it's interesting to, you're never sure what you're going to hear there. So there you go. But anyways, just thought I'd let people know about that. But now back to California. So we talk about weaponizing government. Eric Swalwell has literally, gone off the rails, and he's saying essentially taking sides in this whole battle over ICE and saying all the things he's going to do to people who work for ICE in California if you elect him for governor. So let's watch the video on that.
California Congressman Eric Swalwell out with a new promise to punish ICE officers as he makes a bid for California's highest office. Watch.
They're going to lose their immunity. They're not going to be able to drive. I will take your driver's license. Good luck walking to work. Also, I will direct law enforcement to use every power to prosecute them for battery, false imprisonment, and murder. There's only one side of the ball to be on behalf of Californians when it comes to ICE, and it's offense.
Weaponization of government, anyone? Swalwell is literally saying here that if he is elected governor, he will make sure that people who work for ICE cannot get driver's license in California. In fact, he's saying he will revoke them, I think. And he's also saying, too, in other interviews that he will not, he will make it impossible for people who work for ICE to get hired in the state of California. Apparently, Swalwell has never heard of the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. It kind of sounds a little bit fascistic to me, doesn't it? Apparently he's not that big on the Constitution. But it does make you wonder, does California have other issues with driver's licenses going on?
This is the latest chapter in the ongoing fight between the Trump administration and several states over the issuing of commercial driver's licenses to unqualified drivers in general and illegal immigrant drivers in particular. The federal crackdown began after several deadly crashes across the country caused by illegal immigrants who'd been given CDLs, with California quickly identified by the Trump administration as a serial offender in terms of handing out those licenses.
Wow. So the state of California looks like it is criminally negligent in handing out these driver's licenses to people who are unqualified, and they're getting people killed on the road. So I guess what's the Trump administration doing about this?
So now Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy is cutting $160 million in federal funding for California as a result of the state's failure to meet a January 5th deadline to revoke close to 20,000 CDLs issued to migrants. Duffy writing, quote, "It's reckoning day for Gavin Newsom in California. Our demands were simple. Follow the rules. Revoke the unlawfully issued licenses to dangerous foreign drivers and fix the system so this never happens again."
And so there you have it. We've talked about this story on the show before. The commercial driver's licenses. That's what they mean when they say CDL. And it looked like people who literally couldn't speak English were able to somehow pass those tests, right?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know about you, but when I've gone to take my own driver's license, you had to read English to read the test. So I don't know what it is they're doing there, but and it's important too, because you have to be able to read road signs at the very least. So
Exactly.
Something weird was happening here in California. Maybe some of this corruption, like we're seeing in Minnesota, who knows? But this is one of the issues going on, and here they're worried about the irony that they are massively worried about ICE, while you can see the corruption that's happening in our own government over some of these immigration issues. So yeah, go ahead, Leon.
Well, it is so funny. You have to think about this. That here the state is issuing these driver's license to people who can't even speak English, and they're driving on the roads, and they're supposed to be able to read signs and all these sort of things. So it's not only that this supposed compassion by letting all these illegals into the country, it's not that it is only an act of compassion. It's really an act of danger, because we have seen the examples of people who probably can't read English, don't understand some of the signs on the road or anything like that. In the case in Florida, this guy was making some dangerous U-turn, ended up, I believe, killing 4 people or something like that. He was here illegally and all that. He had a California driver's license, commercial license, and ended up killing 4 people when he was making an illegal turn. But this
just to let people know, he decided, driving a big rig, that you could just make a U-turn in the middle of the freeway.
Exactly.
This guy figured. Who knows how he came to think that, but for whatever reason, he thought he could do that, and a car smashed into the back of his big rig, or underneath. Actually, it just got topped. I think it was like a minivan or something. Anyway, sorry, Leon. I just wanted to clarify.
No problem. But this is exactly the problem. When the government is taking sides with lawbreakers, when indeed they are breaking the law themselves. This takes us back to Louis Brandeis. You cannot have the government illegally issuing license to illegal immigrants and then trying to tell us it is all okay. It's just an act of compassion. This is madness. I do not know when enforcing the law have become a crime. Where is it written that we have to carve out these little special niches for illegal immigrants? They're here illegally to start with, and they're breaking the law. And then you turning around, the government of California is turning around and telling them we could give them a pass. Well, they don't have to know English. They don't have to understand road signs. We could give them a commercial driver's license. And they go on the road and they start killing people. This is madness. And this is exactly what Louis Brandeis is getting to here, where a man could take the law onto himself and he alone decides what is right and wrong, what is law within our society. And then we have anarchy. Everybody will then want their own little special car or their own little special deal. I'm driving down the freeway. I have my grandson with me. I'm driving at 60, 70 miles an hour in a school zone or something like that. And when the policeman stopped me and says, sir, you're driving 60 or 65 in a 30 miles per hour zone, I can say, well, officer, I'm an immigrant. You should give me a break. I now want my little carve out. If the illegal immigrants could have their little carve out, why can't I? That's what it will come down to. You're becoming a law unto yourself. This is anarchy of the worst kind, where the government is participating. The government is participating in the creation of the anarchy. And the other thing that is going on here with all these things in Minnesota and all the things that's going on here in California, the government is encouraging lawbreaking. That's what they're doing. In California, they're giving out license illegally to illegal immigrants. And they're encouraging these people to get on the roads and kill American citizens or kill anybody. It doesn't matter who they kill, but they're killing people. Okay? In Minnesota, we have all these congressmen and congresswomen encouraging people to go protest. But they do not mean protest in the sense of peacefully protest, peaceably assembling. They don't mean that. They want them to go out and obstruct the law enforcement operations, which is a crime in and of itself. This and Renee Good paid with a price. And we'll talk about Mr. Pretty in a little bit. And I think there's good reason to believe why he should have been shot. But we'll talk about that some more. But the point is, too many people now in our society want these little special carve out in the law for themselves. This is anarchy. This is the worst thing that could happen in a constitutional republic. So we better watch this and watch it closely.
You know what's most appalling too about the issue with the commercial driver's licenses is that as a libertarian, I think that a lot of laws, we simply don't need, right? I mean, a lot of the laws that are out there, we are, as Justice Gorsuch has written in his book, overruled. Yes. There are way too many laws out there that the government has grown massively beyond its size and scope of our original Constitution. And this is, just nuts where we've gotten to. But I think one of the claims that most people have who want to see at least a little bit of government, is that there are certain areas of safety and issues of, where some people can endanger other people, right? Mm-hmm. Where maybe government does have a role, right? And I, as a libertarian, I might debate some of those issues too. But the point is, if there's any justification, those are the areas, right? I mean, it's defending private property rights of people, and in the commons, if somebody is putting a risk on somebody else, maybe the government has a role there too. The roads, right, that the government runs and the government sets the rules on, right? There's a safety issue there. There's all kinds of safety issues that the government has all these different laws for auto manufacturers. And, all of us have to pass these driver's license tests. There's all sorts of safety restrictions on the road. And here, because of politics, because the government has put its thumb on the scale, at one point it determined there was a standard that people had to pass this commercial driver's license test in order to meet a certain expected level of safety of the population. And because they had a certain political bias, they just decided to suspend that at the moment, just to allow people who should not be driving, to be driving these big rigs on the road and putting everybody at risk. So it's just appalling, and it's a huge condemnation of government that it is looking the other way for probably, its most its biggest claim for even existing, I guess. Right?
And you talk about appalling. We set up TSA. We set up TSA for supposedly to guard airline safety, right? You know what the Biden administration is doing? Now, every time I decide to travel, like I'm traveling right now. Every time I enter an airport and I want to get on an airplane, I gotta pull out identification. I gotta pull out. I use my passport card. I pull out my passport card, or if I have a driver's license that I can use, I'll have to pull that out, and a boarding pass, of course, just to get through so that I can go catch my plane. But the Biden administration was allowing people with that piece of paper that the border control gave to these illegal immigrants. That piece of paper that give them a court date, they were allowing these so-called migrants to use those to travel. So American citizens have to come up with all of these. They have to come up with the passport card or the driver's license. But yet you had these migrants using just this piece of paper that have somebody's name on it, God knows who, with no photo ID or anything like that, but they can travel like that. This is the kind of problems that we are having, these selective enforcement of law. It's a really, really bad problem. And this gets back to our thing here in California, the selective enforcement of law by turning over driver's license. The government is doing this, the government of California, turning over driver's license to these illegal immigrants, these illegal migrants, or whatever the hell you want to call them, and turning these license over and allowing them to drive on our roads. When an American citizen, under the conditions which they got, the illegal migrants got the commercial driver's license, and American citizens cannot get it. And this is insane.
Well, one thing I wanted to add on to what you just said too, as an aside, you were talking about the TSA and issues of how the government was holding us to different standards than from some of these migrants who come across the border, who they have little idea who they are, and they're just allowing them on the planes, right?
Yeah.
And the issue, a bigger issue here, is a lot of people, kind of had to tear their hair out going through to get these real IDs. In case people who aren't aware of this, we used to have just your normal driver's license, and that was all you had to have as identification to go get on an airplane, at least for domestic travel. And then what happened was states like California decided to start issuing driver's licenses to people who they really didn't know who they were, right? They said, oh, well, we have these migrants in the country, and we'd really love it if they could drive too. And so let's just give them a driver's license. Well, then the problem became, okay, there was a standard with the airlines for safety over what you had to show to get on. And now suddenly that's been watered down, because the assumption was with a driver's license that you had a birth certificate, that you had all this other documentation to say who you were. And now suddenly some states like California watered that down. And that's why we needed a real ID, because then suddenly the government said, oh, now these IDs we issued you before, they're no good because we watered them down. So now here's a real ID. And then, as you just said, Leon, they made us all jump through a real ID hoop, and then they just let immigrants on the planes again.
Explain that to me, please. I'm waiting. Please explain that to me.
So
unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Just nuts.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's right. Nuts. We will sit here and joke about this and laugh about it, but it would be a good joke, it would be a good comedy skit if it wasn't so dangerous. Okay, to see these people who we don't know who they are, we know nothing about them, that they could just get on planes and travel anywhere they want in the United States. This is crazy, nuts, insane, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. And, since we have just a few minutes before we have to break away from public access, I did want to lay out, I guess, why we're currently having these migration number problems again, because I think, about 2 minutes is enough to make that case. So during the Biden administration, this is from a website called usafacts.org, but they talk about the attempted illegal border crossings, and so you can kind of see as a surrogate for how many people were trying to come across during the Biden administration, how many were getting in too, because a lot of these people, they just showed up and then they said, hey, asylum, and then Biden said, oh sure, here's a plane ticket, here's a phone, go where you want. But look at these numbers. I mean, back in the 2000s during the Bush administration, that was when it was at its highest, and that was, you were seeing numbers that were over 150,000 in any particular month. But then you saw those drop significantly in the Obama and Trump administrations until COVID hit, and then you actually had some big numbers right around then, or just before COVID, I guess, during the last year of the Trump administration there, and then the numbers just skyrocketed under Biden. And part of this was because Democrats were signaling to migrants. They were saying essentially, if you show up here, we're going to give you free health care. And there was a lot of other things too that the Biden administration was sort of signaling that, hey, if you show up here, we're going to throw out the welcome mat. And, it's one thing to say, hey, if somebody is coming here and, they just want an opportunity, that's one thing. But if you're throwing out like this idea of get here and you got some free stuff waiting for you, that's kind of what was happening there. So anyway, I don't know if you had any quick thoughts on that, Leon, before we jump to the next half.
Sure. Well, I mean, the thing that I so resent about this madness is that the Democrats did all of this, letting these people into the country. Some of them showed up with shirts saying, "Biden, please let us in." So obviously there's some NGO or some non-profit organization, non-governmental organization, giving them these things at the border or before they try to enter the United States. It is so appalling that all of this is about the gross corruption on the left of trying to look for new voters. They cannot win their arguments, against the liberty-minded. They cannot win their arguments. They just can't. So they have to find new votes. And this is what this is all about, this so-called migration, people looking for a better opportunity nonsense, It is all about votes.
Yeah,
getting
and
new
on that
voters
note,
in.
I think we'll have to say goodbye to our public access audience, but the conversation is going to continue online. So if you're watching on public access, go to knuckleheadsofliberty.com and you'll be able to catch the rest of the show in a few days there as well. So anyways, Leon, I couldn't help, but I, just had to throw up Milton Friedman's. I know we have a slight difference of opinion on this, but I think we see the logic in it.
We do.
There is no doubt that in a free and open, free and open immigration is the right policy in a libertarian state, but in a welfare state is a different story. The supply of immigrants will become infinite, and I think the issue that we have is that you think it's impossible that we can ever get away from a welfare state.
Yes.
so therefore, yeah, I just have the dream that someday we can, and then we can have relatively open borders. That's my libertarian dream. Give people the dignity to just say, hey, if you want to come over here and work on your own dime, that's up to you. If you've got a relationship with somebody that here, that's cool. But just don't come here looking for a transfer from government like a Somali pirate.
Exactly. We've seen a lot of that in Minnesota right now. So yeah. I would say this to you is that if Milton Friedman's dream or your dream was ever possible to hold permanently of the libertarian state, I would agree with his statement wholeheartedly. But in our present condition, within the soul of man, especially in the soul of politicians, it just cannot happen. It just cannot, because the politicians will always corrupt the system. And this is the problem, the corruption that will come as they look for new votes. They always do.
Well, at the very least, we need a liberty revolution if we were going to open the borders, because right now there's so many people who have zero concept of liberty. I mean, for using the government as a club against people they don't like. They're for extracting as much as they can from their neighbor. I mean, this is, that's not the kind of society where you can just open the borders.
Of course, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the if you're going to take the little biblical realm of this, it does say 6 days. The sixth commandment says 6 days you shall work, and also the 10th commandment said you don't covet your neighbor's stuff. So when you have people coming here and expecting welfare transfer payments, they are violating the 6th commandment because it says 6 days you shall work. It means you should be looking for work, you should be training to go to work, or you should be working. One of those three. Okay? And then when you come here and expecting transfer payments, where you're expecting other people to go to work, so to maintain your standard of living, you're coveting people's stuff, which is a violation of the 10th commandment. So I just can't see how this open borders concept of allowing migrants in here, with their own expectations of giving them all that free stuff on the other side, it's unsustainable. It really is. It's truly unsustainable.
There's all kinds of libertarians like myself who we could dream up all kinds of different schemes where, you make a person wait 10 years before they can become a citizen, a zero welfare, just all kinds of things that you could put out there. But the problem is libertarians like me are like less than 1% of the population. So we can dream these things up, but unfortunately we can't convince the rest of y'all that these are good enough ideas to implement. I mean, as far as, just getting this welfare, just reducing the size and scope of government in general. We can't convince people of that. And we're like the Titanic headed for the iceberg of debt.
Yes.
So, yeah.
If maybe a tool such as like maybe some kind of term limits on not term limits, but term limits for the politicians, which I think would be a good idea. But if you had some kind of limit on the length of time that any law should be in effect, so every law I think in the land should have a sunrise and have a sunset. So if we had those laws boundaried, maybe it is possible to have more open borders, because sooner or later the law is going to expire and the Congress or the lawmaking body will have to reauthorize the law. And at least then we get a chance to examine the law, debate it, and then we can say if it's a good idea, we put it back in place. If it's a bad idea, hopefully it would die into the hell of bad legislation. So under those conditions, maybe we can get close to that libertarian state that you dream about. But unless we get to that day where laws having both sunrise and sunset, unless we could get to that day, then I don't think we can ever get close to that libertarian state that you and Milton Friedman dream about.
I mean, in my mind, if you can't get people to see that government should be limited to defining and defending private property rights, and then maybe a debatable role in those areas that can't be easily reduced to private property rights, that should be it, right? And there's so many people who think, I wish government would do this for me. I wish government would pay for my surgery. I wish government would give my kid a trip to Hawaii or whatever. I mean, whatever it is, you name it. I mean, there's all kinds of people who are looking for some grift from government to not just the poor either. I mean, there's rich people out there who are using government to put up some kind of trade restrictions or something else on their competitors. There's all kinds of things out there. We need to just get rid of all that, right? If it's not defining and defending private property rights and something. Anyways, we're getting off track, and we're never going to get back to Minnesota if we don't.
You see, Minnesota is so rich with all its trash and policies and all this other thing. So rich with all of that to talk about that we could go on all night and never get to topics that we intended. So,
With that said, let's dive right back into Minnesota. So I wanted to bring up the let's see. So we'll just to refresh people's minds. This was the nexus of all of the heat about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It seems like forever now. That's how crazy the world is, right? But this woman, Renee Good, we talked about the shooting that she had been involved in, where she was out there interfering with, blocking traffic, essentially, trying to block ICE agents from being able to do their job. And when they tried to order her from her vehicle, she committed felony evasion by taking off when they had legally ordered her out of her vehicle. And she wound up hitting an ICE officer who then returned fire as he was being hit. And just for a quick synopsis, then, of course, you had everybody on the left say they murdered her, and everybody on the right say that, hey, it was a good shoot. so anyways, no pun intended, I guess. But and even in this story here, you say mother of 3 who loved to sing and write poetry, shot and killed by ICE in Minnesota. Like somehow it was because of her poetry and her singing that she got shot. Right? No, that wasn't really the case. But this is kind of what Leon was alluding to earlier, that the media just lies like hell, like the fiery and mostly peaceful protesting.
Yes. The most dishonest people in America today is the media. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
And who was this? This is CNN. And who was this? Oh, CNN.
CNN again.
Fiery but mostly peaceful protest. Just so you understand what Trump was talking about when he gave them the label of fake news.
Fake news. Yes.
So, but anyways, this has kind of been the nexus. We've been showing video clips of all kinds of craziness. Well, before we get into the Preddy shooting, I did want to show a little bit more about what's also been going on there recently, just to help set the stage for people. So this isn't happening in a vacuum. This isn't like, a mother of 3 was singing and dancing and got shot. That's not quite what was happening here. So let's watch a video that shows how a particular story about how a lot of these protesters have been essentially rioting at hotels where they think the ICE agents are staying. So I'm going to show a video clip to kind of catch everybody up to speed on that.
Tensions continue to rise in that state. Protesters were seen overnight. They were trying to violently break into that hotel because they think that ICE agents are staying there.
A fresh set of eyes. Tom Homan going in there, taking control of this, letting some of the 3,000 move on to other cities that definitely need ICE and Border Patrol to patrol. I mean, we have between 9 and 11 million came in during the Biden years. There's a lot more criminals out there.
So let's hear a little more detail from the on-the-scene reporter about what's going on there.
This has been going on for weeks, where these agitators target hotels where they think immigration agents are staying. I actually did a ride along with the Border Patrol agent, and he told us point blank that they experienced this. The agitators show up. They make as much noise as possible, trying to prevent immigration agents from getting any sleep or rest. And this latest riot happened last night at a Minneapolis Hilton. Protesters banged on trash cans. They slammed snow shovels, blew whistles, and tried to force their way in.
So let's see a little bit more footage about how dangerous and scary this thing really looks on the ground. What we appear to be seeing is a lone federal agent who is armed, trying to hold that door all by himself in the middle of a mob. And he's also surrounded by reporters, and it's dark, it's at night, and there's all kinds of noise. And it looks pretty scary and chaotic, and you can see how easily accidents could happen out here.
About 20 yards out, you're seeing this suspected federal officer, try to train his long gun on, his less lethal gun on demonstrator in the distance there.
Is everyone pressed?
We're all overnight. We're all members of the press. We're all pressed here. Okay. This officer appears to be bleeding from the mouth. Oh my God.
Are you okay? I'm fine.
Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Says he's all right.
Where's the local PD? That's my question for the press.
Okay, it's off.
Where is the local PD?
Yes, where is the local PD? Clearly, this is a bunch of illegal activity happening here. Let's hear what the Minneapolis PD have to say about this.
I see nothing. I know nothing.
So there you go. That's pretty much the the response of the local PD. I should say though that after the most recent stuff where I think Trump has looked like they're trying to pull down the temperature, I think the police did come in this last night. But like that reporter said, this has been going on for like over a week or so at these hotels. And the police finally came to do something about it, like I think yesterday. So I mean, this is where we're at, right? And they started arresting people, but yeah, absolutely nuts. So you got any thoughts on this, Leon?
Well, the thing that is happening here, I mean, that is quite disgusting, is these so-called protesters who I have already said have no right to interfere in law enforcement operations. They are now going into private property to do their damn nonsense. Look at this here. We're looking at this a hotel. We have a case of them involving Don Lemon that went into church and interrupt church service on private property. So they are now, the politicians in Minnesota have been encouraging this from the very beginning. Okay, and these so-called protesters are getting emboldened. So they think they could go on private property. They could go in churches, and they have already gone into one church. They could go in hotels to find out if ICE agents are staying there and doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And this is exactly how incidents occur where shots get fired and people die. Renee Good and this petty guy, people get shot because of this damn nonsense. And until these politicians stop encouraging this stuff, we're going to see more people get shot. Just recently, a reporter in Minnesota got infiltrated a chat. It was a signal chat or something like that. And he discovered that this so-called protest, this so-called peaceful protest, or mostly peaceful protest, is a well-organized terrorist organization funded by somebody. I don't know who they're funded by. But they have all the threads of all the discussions that's going on about where to go here, go there, all the kind of stuff, well organized. So these are not, random, spontaneous people care about. These are not people who care about civil rights and all these sort of things. They don't give one crap about that. They are just there to interfere with the enforcement of the law, which is to arrest these people who come here illegally and send them back across the border. But no, the Democrats need these people, and they're encouraging them to keep on going because the mayor and the governor of Minnesota are doing nothing but encouraging this sort of things. And this goes back to how we started this very show, of where people are taking the law into their own hands. But this is going to get people shot and killed.
Yeah, and as you were mentioning the signal chat issue, I can't remember the journalist's name who was Higby, that's it. I haven't had enough of a chance to dig into that, and there were so many other topics to talk about tonight that I didn't think we'd have enough time to cover that on the show either.
Yes.
In any depth. But very likely we might be talking about that next week as more and more stuff comes out, because there's a lot breaking from that that I've heard. Even the lieutenant governor of Minnesota has been tied into this signal chat.
Yes.
Meaning that therefore the state government is somehow organizing to thwart the law enforcement of the federal government, which is, the definition of an insurgency. Right?
Exactly.
So,
an insurrection.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so this is where, things are kind of flying off the handle there. And maybe it's good that, we'll talk a little bit later in the show about efforts to tone down the volume of what's happening there. But this brings up the issue that we were talking about, as Leon mentioned, that government is turning a blind eye when that federal officer is saying, where is local law enforcement? Because it's literally local law enforcement's job to be there if people are breaking into that hotel. It's not ICE's job to to guard the hotel, and then now you're putting these other agents in a position where, you know, to do things that they're really not trained for, and then people wonder why this is all flying off the handle, right? And it's because government is arbitrarily enforcing laws, kind of like with those commercial driver's licenses that we talked about earlier, and putting everybody at risk in not enforcing the letter of the law. And you know, it's probably fair to say that, you know, to some degree, maybe the right does this in some situations too, although I'm not thinking of one right off the top of my head, but I'd certainly entertain that. You bring it up. But we certainly see the left is absolutely doing that in this case.
Yes.
So this is, you know, part of the root of the problem. But this does bring us up to the Preddy shooting now. And so I think it's worth talking about that, because that is the new flashpoint, right? We talked about Renee Good, and that was the flashpoint 2 weeks ago. Then Don Lemon's church raid was the flashpoint a week ago. And now it's the Preddy shooting, which is the new flashpoint. So let's get into that, because there's a lot of controversy, and I think a lot more well-founded controversy over that shooting than there appeared to be over the Good shooting, which I thought was much more straightforward. So let's watch a video on that. So I'm just going to interrupt a few places just to point out some key moments in the video. In this point, you can see the two women who are standing in the middle of the street are protesters. And the hand that you can see with the phone recording right now in the foreground of the picture is Mr. Preddy, who is the person who winds up dying at the end of this video. Let's watch a little bit more. So although we can't really tell for sure if these protesters are breaking any laws, Mr. Preddy at least appears to be directing traffic, which is kind of an odd thing to do if you're just somebody who's a bystander or holding a protest sign. And from what we've seen in earlier, situations that have occurred in a lot of these protests, they are most likely doing something to hinder the ICE agent's ability to move in traffic, but we don't actually clearly see that happening, at least in this frame. We just see that they're obviously out in the street doing some things. This was a confusing part when I first saw it. I wasn't sure exactly who was who, but what has been detailed to have happened since is that the ICE agent, one of the ICE agents, came over and started pushing the women protesters to the ground, and Mr. Preddy inserted himself in between them to tries to lift up one of the females, which is when then he is grabbed at that point and thrown to the ground. And at this point, he only has his camera in his hand. He is not holding a gun. I've heard somebody say maybe he had a water bottle in the other hand or something, but the point is he is not brandishing a gun. And where this particular video clip stops is after the first shot, and it's been determined that there were actually 9 more shots, I think, fired at this point, at least is one of the reports I've heard. And so, and also too, you can note that there was a lot of noise all around this situation too, all these whistles and everything else. So there you have it. That's kind of a characterization. I tried to stay as neutral as possible in just what we're seeing, and well, Leon, why don't you give me your take first, and if you want to, and I'll talk about it afterwards.
Okay. Let me just say that anytime an American citizen is shot by law enforcement, it's a tragedy. Okay, it's very tragic. I don't want to see that. Okay. But there are times that law enforcement has to do their jobs, and no one should interfere with that. What I am seeing on that video, I've watched other videos of this incident. What I'm seeing on that video is this Preddy interfering with a legitimate law enforcement operation. That is what I am seeing. Okay. And there's one video with him actually having a gun in his hand. I've seen that video.
From this incident or from a different incident?
This incident. I
have not seen.
If I'm not mistaken, well, I hope I'm not looking at something from a week ago. He also had
Well, let's not confuse the surprise. Huh? We've got some other stuff to show later, and I don't want to short circuit everything.
So. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but the point is though, this. Let me just be broad here without getting too specific. This is interference with law enforcement operations, with the legitimate law enforcement operations. And if you are creating chaos within that, you're blowing whistles, you're trying to block traffic, you're trying to do all these sort of things and stuff like that, you're putting law enforcement on an edge. And and sooner or later, somebody gonna have to start shooting to protect themselves or to protect people around there. This is not protesting. This is not protesting. It says peaceably assemble. That's what the Constitution says. Yeah, these people are making noise. They're going into hotels. They're doing all sorts of things and that kind of stuff in Minnesota. And this guy was known to law enforcement previously because he had an incident a week prior. So I am going to say for now, unless you can show me something else that I've missed, that this was a legitimate shooting. Okay? And this guy belongs to an organization that could be classified as a terrorist organization. They try to hide it. They're trying to hide their identities on the signal chat. He belongs to that organization, as far as I know. So I think this was a legitimate shooting. I know they're going to put him on administrative leave. I know there's going to be an investigation and all that. Fine, let them do that. I'm perfectly fine with that. God, because if they did anything wrong, if they were not following protocols or anything like that, fine. They may be prosecuted or they may be in some way, I don't know, suspended or whatever is the necessary punishment. However, these people are putting ICE on edge. That's what they're doing. So the police is going to shoot at some point in time, and people are going to get hurt.
Yeah, and this is at the very least. Let me just start by saying that if anybody was ever in doubt that all laws are enforced at the end of the day by the barrel of a gun, this is it, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Because if you want to say that the ICE agents, needed to get these people off the street, and it winds up in somebody being shot. I mean, I'm not saying that in itself is necessarily justified, but I mean, it does show you that as people resist, everything escalates the more you resist.
Exactly.
When law enforcement is trying to enforce a law. Now, and I did hear, I think the best analysis I've heard of this so far, the most nuanced analysis, is from a guy called Nate the Lawyer, and I talked a little bit about his stuff when I saw the Renee Good one, and I think I was pretty much on the same page with him on that, and I very much appreciated his take on this, although I'm not sure I 100% agree with him, but I very much liked his nuanced take on this. And in his thoughts were that, one, at least from what was on the video, you couldn't clearly see them committing a crime. The protesters who were out there in this particular video. But what you did see happening was one ICE agent, and ironically not the shooter, but an ICE agent who was pushing these women to the ground, which he then characterized as an assault. Because the moment you do that, if they are not doing something to warrant being thrown to the ground, essentially, which is what we did see in that video. And you want to go see Nate the lawyer's thing, he documents several of these things. But and Nate the lawyer had been a police officer, a public defender, and a prosecutor. So that's pretty good life perspective, I think, from some of this stuff. But he said that ultimately that was the biggest infraction in this whole thing, because that was the most unwarranted infraction. The idea that force was exercised to throw these women to the ground. And, you know, when Preddy put himself in between them and the woman, you know, again, he was holding a cell phone, and, you know, I've heard some people say, well, he put his hands on him, and so that's an assault. And, well, I mean, I that's a really marginal, dicey thing, I guess, here we're going to say, because if you really watch the video, he doesn't look like he's grabbing the ICE agent. He looks like he's just in between, and his hands are pretty much up. But the thing is that he goes to pick up the woman, and then he is thrown to the ground. And then that's when the gun materializes, when, you know, they're all over him, and the gun is pulled out by one agent. There's some question whether or not that gun accidentally went off or not. But then the guy who actually did the shoot, he may have had a very reasonable expectation that that was legit. He heard somebody yell gun. There was a gun. And if that other gun had accidentally gone off, he very well may have been justified as a reasonable, you know, it's what Nate the lawyer said was, it's what a reasonable officer would determine as a serious enough threat to fire, essentially, you know. And that's the issue, right? I mean, they've got this guy on the ground. He looks like he's about to get up. There's a gun now that's been pulled out. So one of his other officers yells gun. And so it's hard to know exactly. And we really need to see some more evidence, I think, on this to be clear. But he did think that the one guy who seemed to use excessive force in pushing these gals to the ground, who didn't appear to be assaulting the officers in the video, they didn't appear to be spitting on them, assaulting them, or, you know, other than just being out on the street. So this is it's much more troubling than the good shooting, I guess, which ironically
good shooting. Yes.
Yeah, that happened 2 weeks earlier. So anyway, so that's my initial take. I we're gonna get a little deeper later in the show.
No, I can't really disagree with what you just said, Jason. But when the police officer pushed that woman to the ground, okay, that woman was virtually in the face of, well, not police officer, the ICE agent. That woman was virtually in the face of the police officer. Okay, what was she doing there? Okay, what was she doing there? Okay, that is interference of a law enforcement operation. All that whistleblowing and carrying on and all that kind of stuff, that's interference of a law enforcement operation. So it could be legitimately argued, if that woman got into that police officer's face, maybe you could argue that he should have arrested her rather than push her to the ground. You could make that argument, and I'm open to that argument. But that woman was brutally in the man's face. So could you say, well, you shouldn't push her to the ground? You could probably say that. Maybe you can say, well, I put you under arrest, blah, 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 and do whatever, read her rights and do whatever is necessary. But this is the point I'm trying to make. These people are out there for the sole purpose of trying to interfere with ICE's work. That's what they're doing. So they're putting ICE on edge. If you're doing that, mistakes are going to happen. So even if this was a mistake, I still think we have to give the police officer benefit of the doubt. We have to. Well, because these people are out there deliberately trying to interfere with their work.
Let's dig a little more with a few other angles of this thing, not angles from the shoot, but things that were happening. And by the way, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to show the hotel issue before we saw this Preddy issue, because if you were just to see this video by itself in a vacuum, you know, and you didn't understand what was happening in Minnesota, I think if this were normal law enforcement and that had happened, I think that there would be some officers going to jail. I think, you know, without a doubt, this, you know, this looks pretty nuts, you know, what happened here. But I think it's really important to understand the larger context of what's happening here. That video that we saw of, an officer who, one of the reporters literally said, "Hey, this guy's bleeding. Are you hurt?" To the law enforcement officer. He's standing there holding, this hotel entrance, asking where the police are. Right. I mean,
right.
That's not the way this thing is supposed to work. There is supposed to be another government agency that is supposed to be there, and they failed. Right. They completely failed in what they were supposed to do. So this is a really complicated situation here that can't, I don't think, be judged completely on just the context of what we're seeing here, but it also shouldn't, the context of what we're seeing here shouldn't just be ignored either.
Exactly. So if I could add, I think, no, I'm not sure about this thing though, but Jacob Fry is the mayor of Minneapolis.
Yeah.
As far as I understand it, he told his police officers to stand down. As far as I understand it, there was a report to that effect, but I don't know if it is actually true. But I think that is what happened, because the police officer was there talking about where's the Minneapolis PD, where's the Minneapolis PD. Okay, I think Jacob Fry told those people to stand down. I believe so.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me, but we'll dig in on that when we get some more facts.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. But so anyways, I did want to get, though, because there's a lot of other issues to this story aside from just whether or not this was a good or bad shoot. Let's hear what the hot takes were from the administration on this. And I think that's a little bit troubling as well. So let's go to that.
At 9:05 a.m. Central Time, the Department of Homeland Security law enforcement officials and officers were conducting targeted operations in Minneapolis against an illegal alien whose criminal history included domestic assault with intentionally inflicting bodily harm, disorderly conduct, and driving without a valid license. An individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. The officers attempted to disarm this individual, but the armed suspect reacted violently. Fearing for his life and for the lives of his fellow officers around him, an agent fired defensive shots. The suspect also had 2 magazines with ammunition in them that held dozens of rounds. He also had no ID. This looks like a situation where an individual arrived at the scene to inflict maximum damage on individuals and to kill law enforcement.
Okay, so we've already seen the video ourselves, and as you can see, the Mr. Preddy, the suspect, never brandished the weapon. And he did not seem to be there to kill law enforcement. In fact, he was helping a woman up when he was taken down.
And look, Secretary Noem stated it perfectly. You do not get to attack law enforcement officials in this country without any repercussions. You do not get to do that in Minnesota, LA, or anywhere else. No one who wants to be peaceful shows up at a protest with a firearm that is loaded with 2 full magazines. That is not a peaceful protest, and you do not get to touch law enforcement. You do that anywhere, this FBI is going to be leading the charge to arrest them.
We'll get into, I guess, the Second Amendment issue of whether or not you can bring a gun to a protest after the tape here. But this does beg the question, where was the threat from Mr. Preddy?
But how was he threatening Border Patrol? You've collected the evidence, you said, right? You have the handgun in your possession?
That's right.
And how was he using that handgun in terms of threatening Border Patrol? What was the threat? He had his camera, right? He was filming it.
That's something that I let the DHS and the prosecutors, because they are the ones investigating that case. I don't want to stylize that evidence.
Wow. So the hot take of our law enforcement leadership is that he was there to kill people, but then when asked for evidence, they say, well, we'll let somebody else characterize that. Anyways, let's find out what Trump's hot take is on it.
President Trump faulted Preddy for carrying a gun to the protest.
Certainly he shouldn't have been carrying a gun.
So I think regardless of whether you think this was a good shoot or not, I think one thing is really clear, that these officials got out way over their skis on this when they characterized this. We're watching the video. We don't see him coming with the gun, right? And that's literally the way they were trying to characterize this, and that therefore this shooting was people defending their lives right away. It could be that maybe that winds up coming out in the evidence somehow, but that's not what we've seen at this point. I don't know. What is your thoughts, Leon, on that?
Well, the issue about now, he has a CCW concealed weapon permit. He has one, okay, which was legally obtained. However, on that particular day, the law requires in Minnesota for him to be carrying his ID, carrying some kind of ID, and carrying the permit on him. So if he had a gun on him, which as far as I know, he did have a gun on him, he was carrying that gun illegally at the time, even though he has a concealed weapon permit. So there's a little issue there. There's a little issue there of whether he was carrying that gun legally or not. Under the law, if he did not have his driver's license or some kind of ID and the permit itself on him at the time, he was carrying that gun illegally. Now,
Leon, the one pushback I wanted to make on that, and I'm sure you're absolutely right on that. The only thing is the officers probably didn't know that at the time, right? Because they don't see the gun until after they're in an altercation with them, not before the altercation with them.
Okay.
So anyways, that's just one thing.
Reasonable point. That's a fair point. There's a fair point. However, though, at some point in time, that gun came out. Okay? At some point in time. I think there's a video on it available somewhere. That gun came out. And that's when one of the officers, I believe, shot gun and the shooting started.
From the videos I've seen, it was an officer removing the gun I think while he was in the process of removing the gun, I think once he'd cleared it from his holster, he shouted gun to everybody. I'm not sure if it's the guy for sure who, this is where, we really need the evidence, of when there's a legal transcript, once there's been a real investigation to find out who said what, right? Because I tell you, I've seen this develop over several days and it has morphed every time I'm hearing about this, every day I find out there's something about the characterization of what's happened that isn't quite what it seemed. Like when I first saw that woman go to the ground, I didn't know who the woman was. And the way that this pretty guy was picking her up, it looked pretty rough. I thought that he was fighting with her. But it turned out that they're on the same side and he was actually trying to lift her up. So, it's so hard to understand just by seeing this whole thing out of context, what exactly is occurring, right? Until we, really get a little bit more evidence, it feels like. So anyway, that was some of my thoughts on it. Well, did you have more that you wanted to jump into on that?
No, I would just say that, fine. I've seen videos. These are the show and some other online, and I don't want to. I will not close my mind on this. I want to see. Whatever the investigation shows and whatever it shows, then we take action accordingly. If the police or if the ICE agents were wrong on this time, I hope they are not. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt in these cases, but whatever it is, let the chips fall where they may.
What about what are your thoughts though on say Kristi Noem? What she said so far? Are you thinking that maybe there is some piece of evidence that will sort of justify what she said, or do you think that she went way overboard on how she characterized this?
Well, the Trump administration, I think, does do on the other side of the left at times. Okay, so the left will go way overboard. When say for instance when Renee Good was shot, they went way overboard. Oh, she was murdered. Yeah.
Mother of three who loves to sing and dance got shot after dropping her kid off at school. Right, she was clearly part of an operation to interfere with what ICE was doing. She was blocking the road, and then she the police order to get out of her car.
And she did not, and all that.
Yeah, so.
disobeying police commands. Now, on the other side of the coin, we have Trump and his officials like Kristi Noem, who will jump out to the press immediately and say this happened, and make the situation look like, well, the guy had pulled the gun out and he was, maybe it almost sounded like he was about to fire on one of the ICE agents, and that's when he was shot. Okay, so we have on one side we have the left with their damn nonsense, on the other side we have the Trump administration, who has a tendency, like me, I have to admit that, of tendency to give the police the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so they will jump out there and make all these statements, and many times they cannot be supported. So this is why I'm saying I don't want to close my mind on this one. I want to see what the investigation shows. I think Christino might have gotten above her skis a little bit on this, and let's see what the investigation says. Even though I have my own personal biases that I will tend to give ICE agents the benefit of the doubt, given what's going on in Minnesota. But let's wait and see.
Well, now that we've kind of pushed back on the right a little, it's time to push back on the left a little here, because the left has kind of sainted, both good and pretty at this point. Since they're the subject of these ICE shootings, and Preddy has been almost elevated to sainthood at this in this short period of time, because he's a nurse who was out there, and he appeared to be helping somebody when he was thrown to the ground and shot, and it seems like, oh my gosh, this is the one of the worst abuses of law enforcement ever. Okay, well, there is now a little bit of new context that came out today, and it's not from that particular day, but it's from about a week earlier.
A week ago, yes.
Yeah. So let's watch some of that video, and we can see a little bit more about how Preddy has behaved in other altercations with ICE.
This is a moment the news movement filmed on January 13th in Minneapolis, showing a man who appears to be Alex Preddy interacting with federal immigration agents 11 days before Border Patrol shot and killed him. Our footage was analyzed by the BBC, whose facial recognition technology confirmed his identity to a 97% degree of accuracy.
So this is a video that just broke today, and it purports to characterize Preddy in a very different light than what we saw in the actual shooting video. And this is put together by a group called the News Movement. It's a group I hadn't heard of before, but like I said, this is just breaking, so we may hear a lot more about this in the coming days. But it does look legit, so let's continue to watch.
On the morning of January 13th, our team received a tip that federal agents were blocking a street at the corner of East 36 and Park Avenue in Minneapolis. We arrived around 10:15 a.m. We saw observers shouting at the agents as they walked back to their vehicles. When they started driving away, the man kicked their taillight. An agent then got out of the vehicle, grabbed him, and pushed him to the ground.
So in this video, we can see Mr. Preddy was most certainly not a peaceful protester. He was destroying private property that the agents were in, assaulting the vehicle that they were in, and shouting and spitting at them. And then he was taken down. Let's watch a little bit more.
During the altercation, agents fired tear gas and pepper balls into the crowd. They continued to hold the man down before they retreat, and he walks away. The man in our footage is wearing a similar outfit to what Preddy was wearing on the day he was killed. What appears to be a gun is also visible above his waistband.
And interesting to note also, he was armed in this instance as well, and he was very lucky to walk away from that instance, because he literally instigated an attack on the officers. So this, like I said, this does not necessarily excuse what happened on the day of his shooting, but it does put into light that there may be more than what we've seen on the other video. So we should really hold judgment before we jump to one side or the other on this, and let the evidence play out.
Yeah, that's a really good video. I mean, it shows the Preddy in the light that should be shown. Yeah, I think you're right. It doesn't justify the actions a week later, but it does tell us what kind of person we are dealing with, though. It certainly does that. So I mean,
well, Leon, before you go any farther, one question I have to ask too is, where the hell are the police, right? I mean,
okay.
Another police situation, and they're left for ICE to do all of the enforcement, right? I mean, this is, certainly law enforcement would know if there is a big commotion happening.
Right.
Like someone would have called 911, and, there's no police in sight. And this, again, is you take it right back to that earlier quote that we had, but, law enforcement not, doing that, the government not following the law, right?
The law, exactly.
Either this is the type of thing you enforce or it isn't, but apparently it's only if you're on the right political side that it gets enforced in Minnesota.
Right. Jason, you just asked a very personal question. Where's the police? The truth of the matter is somebody has to tell the Minneapolis Police Department to stand down. Somebody is doing that. So the most likely culprit in this case has to be the mayor. Okay. So we have the government of Minnesota, of Minneapolis, I should say. The government of Minneapolis, the chief executive of Minneapolis, which is the mayor, telling police officers not to do their jobs. Now, if that is not a pathway to anarchy, to disorder, to uncivil society, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, we played the quote last week. I didn't bring it back for this week, but Jacob Fry's response to ICE is get the fuck out of Minnesota, right? So, so I do have a video here that talks about a little bit of the attempts now to turn down the heat on all of this, and I think now's a good time to show that because it does show where different players are on this, including Jacob Fry, who we're just talking about. So let's watch this clip.
Border Czar Tom Homan announced he had meetings with Governor Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Fry here in Minnesota. Homan writing, "Today I met with Governor Walz, Mayor Fry, and top law enforcement officials to discuss the issues on the ground in Minnesota. We all agree that we need to support our law enforcement officers and get criminals off the streets. While we don't agree on everything, these meetings were a productive starting point, and I look forward to more conversations with key stakeholders in the days ahead." Now, President Trump has laid out a plan for what he says will end the chaos here in Minnesota, which in part requires Minnesota to turn over criminals for deportation.
So Trump is trying to negotiate to bring the temperature down, and he's brought in Tom Homan. But of course, there's two sides to every negotiation. Let's hear what the other side has to say about it.
But Mayor Fry doesn't seem willing to play ball, also writing that I made it clear that Minneapolis does not and will not enforce federal immigration laws and that we will remain focused on keeping our neighbors and streets safe. City leaders will continue to stay in conversation with Mr. Homan and his team. So not clear what the path is moving forward as far as Minneapolis complying with the Trump administration. Governor Walz also released a statement through his office. And while he didn't make it clear, he didn't definitively state that Minnesota is unwilling to cooperate with the Trump administration. So
well, it's not really a negotiation when one side is willing to give on some things and the other side is literally willing to give nothing. So they just, I think Fry's term was get the fuck out of my city is what he said before. And it doesn't seem to have changed. So I'm not quite sure where this is going to go. But isn't it interesting, though, if we just look back just a few presidencies ago, and it was kind of a different world for the Democrats here, where Barack Obama was literally celebrating the work of Tom Homan.
Even as we are a nation of immigrants, we're also a nation of laws. Undocumented workers broke our immigration laws, and I believe that they must be held accountable, especially those who may be dangerous. That's why over the past 6 years, deportations of criminals are up 80%. And that's why we're going to keep focusing enforcement resources on actual threats to our security.
So, yeah, it's kind of a crazy reality there in Minnesota today that maybe Democrats from 10 or 15 years ago wouldn't recognize.
Yeah, they wouldn't recognize the party now, because before Trump came along, Obama had a record for deportations. He deported about, in his 8 years in office, I believe, or something like that, he deported about 3 million people. And everybody was celebrating that. Oh, look at Obama, that good, strong leader we got, and all kind of stuff. Now that Trump is doing it, and okay, fine, he's moving greater numbers out. All of a sudden, now it's a big problem. Okay.
And I should say too, Barack Obama didn't have the issue where somebody had just allowed 20 million immigrants into the country
exactly
before his term. Well, so anyways,
exactly. Good point. But the point is, though, we cannot allow this hypocrisy and this lawlessness to continue. I mean, fine, if people want to come to this country, I have no problem with that. I'm an immigrant myself. Okay, I have no problem. But please get in line, do it legally. Okay? It took me 16 years to go from a student visa to American citizenship. 16 years. I did it. It was frustrating at times. It was I was pulling my hair out at times. All of that. It took me 16 years. Now, do I want people to be waiting 16 years? No. Okay? I don't. All right? We could probably reform the system, the process where it could become a little bit smoother, a little bit quicker. But don't think just because you think you wake up in some Guatemala, Honduras, or something, that suddenly you could just wake up and decide, I am going to America. We are a sovereign country. Okay? We have laws. And your first act here cannot be to break our laws. That cannot be. So I want some reform of the process, but I sure like hell do not want the law breaking that we've seen. And I don't want government officials taking sides on an issue where it involves not enforcing the law. I mean, these people are now talking about we're not going to enforce federal law. What the hell does that mean? So do we have a country or not? And do we live in a constitutional republic or not? That you could decide which laws you want to obey and which laws you don't want to obey. Could I do that? Could I? Well, so these are the problems that we are facing, and the left is pushing these issues, pushing them, and they're pushing these ICE agents into a corner, and they get them into a corner, and they respond, and then we end up with Rene Good dead. We end up with Alex, I think his name is Alex Pretty, dead. These things are not happening in a vacuum. They are not.
Yeah. Well, sadly, I just hate to keep going back to it, but socialism ruins everything, and we'd need a lot less restrictions at the border if we had a lot less socialism. But anyways, I did want to touch just on this whole Second Amendment argument too, because we've heard a lot about, can you bring a gun to a protest? And I think we really kind of need to get into that. I mean, we if we weren't a libertarian type show, maybe we could dodge that. that's a biggie. So let's touch on that a little bit. Here's a little news segment that kind of got into that issue.
The Minneapolis shooting has renewed a debate over the Second Amendment and concealed carry laws, but this time the political roles are reversed. The right to bear arms has been a Republican Party big issue for decades. Conservative politicians have strongly defended the Second Amendment by successfully passing gun rights laws such as concealed carry in every state. Minneapolis shooting victim Alex Pretty was legally carrying a firearm.
And so this appears to be the controversy and the hypocrisy around the whole event, is that it almost seems like the sides have flipped on who says it's okay to have a firearm. The left always seems to want to pull away firearms, and the right always seems to want to push for firearm rights, and the roles almost seem to be reversed. Let's look a little deeper.
But top Trump administration officials say he did not have a right to do so.
You cannot bring a firearm loaded with multiple magazines to any sort of protest that you want. It's that simple.
However, President Trump supported Kyle Rittenhouse after he shot and killed two men who tried grabbing his gun during a Kenosha protest following a police-involved shooting. Some January 6 rioters were armed, and many Republicans supported this Missouri couple who pointed their firearms at George Floyd protesters.
Let's hear from the U.S. Concealed Carry Association.
Mr. Pretty was not violating the law in terms of the Second Amendment. He had a constitutionally protected right, and the law in Minnesota did not prohibit him from carrying a firearm down there.
But former FBI agent Rob Chadwick, who now works for the U.S. Concealed Carry Association, says the law gets dicey if the armed person inserts themselves in a law enforcement operation.
When you take that step and get involved physically in a law enforcement action, it is incredibly dangerous, and unintended consequences do happen.
And one of the things I wanted to get into real quick is that there was another libertarian who actually got killed a few years ago in a BLM protest. I don't know if I'd characterize this one as necessarily a riot, but it was certainly a protest where they were blocking the streets and such. And he was carrying, and things got a little bit out of control. And his name was Garrett Foster. Or Forster, I'm not sure, but let's pull up the tape on that too, because you can see how it doesn't even have to be law enforcement when you bring a gun into a situation and people are actively violating each other's rights in the moment, things can get pretty messy. So let's watch this quick clip too.
Today we're hearing from the man who says he shot an Austin protester last weekend. That protester, Garrett Foster, died. Attorneys for the shooter, Daniel Perry, released a statement today telling Perry's side of the story.
So this is from a shooting that happened back during the Summer of Love, the BLM protests / riots that were happening across the country. This one was in Austin, Texas, and this is kind of an odd one because a Uber driver who happened to be a military person was driving, and he accidentally got himself into one of the protests. He just was driving the streets, and there was a protest, and it was he found himself stuck there, and then he had people banging on his car. And well, let's hear his side of the story.
He did say it was self-defense, as he was here as a rideshare driver coming in, dropping off somebody here in downtown Austin. Then he turned from 4th Street onto Congress Avenue when he approached a crowd of Black Lives Matter protesters. Now, Perry says the protesters started hitting his car. The protesters said he drove into the crowd somewhat aggressively. According to Perry, Garrett Foster motioned to him to lower his window, and when he did, Perry thought that Foster was somebody from law enforcement. When he figured out that Foster wasn't, he said Foster started to raise his AK-47 type gun and so fired his handgun, killing Foster.
What's important to point out here is that these situations are chaotic. These people were blocking the street, probably illegally blocking the street, but being allowed to do so just because that was the political temperature at the moment. And here this guy is caught in the middle of it in his car, people banging on his car, so he's already feeling maybe a little bit threatened and held hostage since he can't just drive forward. And now suddenly there's somebody with a gun approaching his vehicle, brandishing a gun, not a concealed weapon. And it's dicey, to say the least.
According to police, Perry drove away and called 911 to report what had happened. Police officers took Perry in for questioning, then released him pending the result of the investigation. According to Perry's attorneys, he did not know the marches were taking place downtown last weekend. Perry said he felt threatened when Foster supposedly raised his rifle, so that's why he fired his handgun.
And this is the guy who was killed in that particular incident. But again, this wasn't even a law enforcement incident, right? This is literally two different people who were carrying a gun. And, the one guy was feeling very threatened by a bunch of people who were blocking him from being able to peacefully pass, right? I mean, is it really peacefully protesting if you're not allowing other people to peacefully pass? And then somebody walks up to his window with a gun while people are banging on his car. And by the way, I kind of take exception of how the protesters apparently were describing that, because just by the story here, he was stopped so that the other guy came up to his side of his car and the window rolled down. Well, you're not moving at that point, right? So this is pretty nuts, this whole thing. And by the way, that guy got convicted for that shoot, and then the governor pardoned him afterwards in Texas. So just this is and this guy apparently was a libertarian who believed in this particular Black Lives Matter march, and he brought a gun to this protest. And, what I would say is, man, if you are a Second Amendment person who wants to bring a gun with you, you should be doing everything you can to make sure you are not trespassing on anybody so that you don't get in a situation where that gun has to come out, or that people are going to see you as potentially a threat for having the gun. It's because once everything gets gray and murky, that situation is going to get amped up by you having that gun out there. So,
the law becomes somewhat upside down now, because in this particular case here with the case in Austin, the guy is there trying to get out of the crowd, and some guy comes up with this AK-47 or whatever the hell he came up with. I would be scared. Especially if I have someone with me. Well, he did not, but I would be scared, and scared enough to probably wonder what that guy was going to do with that gun that he was clearly showing. So, and I always wondered why he was prosecuted. I know he was, but and of course, as you said, he was eventually pardoned. But I don't think he should have been prosecuted, because this is a case where, in that chaos, you have to give the benefit of the doubt in this particular case, to the guy who was in the car. I don't remember what his name was, but it just
Kenny or Perry was his name.
Perry, yes, something Perry, yes. Yeah, but these social justice warriors, who look like, they have nothing else to do. They're always out there causing the chaos, and then when they find a sacrificial lamb, they can always claim, "Oh, look at the Nazis acting. Look at those Nazis." In that case of the I forget their last names, but the people in Missouri, those BLM Black Lives Matter people, they broke down a gate and got on the private property.
Oh, I know. I remember who you're talking about. The guy with the pink polo shirt and his wife, and
Yes.
she's pointing a gun like this, and he's standing there holding an AR-15. I think.
Exactly. We later found out that the gun wasn't the gun that the woman was pointing didn't even work. Okay, but nobody knew that at the time.
That's what they said afterwards. I mean, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Right? I mean, they were lawyers, so they may.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Good point.
Yeah.
But the point out of all of this stuff like that, these people came onto private property. Don't you think you would see that as a threat? If you come onto private property, you're rioting and you're doing whatever else, you think you broke down a gate, and somebody take out a gun to protect their property, and you know who get prosecuted? The people who are holding the gun. Not the people who
on
broke
their
down
own
the gate.
property, on their own property.
On their own property.
They didn't go out in anybody else's. They were not part of a protest. They didn't leave to be part of a protest. They were standing their ground on their own property at a time when people were burning down neighborhoods, right? I mean,
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I mean, it's just absolutely nuts. And of course, the Chicago I think it was some Chicago DA or something. They went after them because they were part.
It was Kansas City. The woman name was Kim Gardner, one of those George Soros woke prosecutors. I think her name was Kim Gardner, if I'm not mistaken. But you know what is the bottom line of this, Jason? This demonstrates exactly what Louis Brandeis was trying to say in his quote, because you would think in a sane society you would be on the side of the people who are trying to protect their own private property. But no, those people got prosecuted. I think they were eventually pardoned by the governor of the state, or if there were any federal charge. I don't think there were any federal charges, but I think they were eventually pardoned by the governor of Missouri, if I'm not mistaken. But this is the kind of insanity that's embedded in this quote by Louis Brandeis. The law is upside down. Selective prosecution. You're tolerating violence. People broke down the gate. You're tolerating the destruction. People got on the broke down the gate and got on the private property. And then when people try to protect their property, you're prosecuting people for protecting their property. What madness is this? People can take the law into their own hands. They walk away scot-free, and the people who try to protect their property are the ones who are persecuted. This is the insanity that is embedded in this quote here by Louis Brandeis. People taking the law into their own hands, and these BLM people, this fraud of a people, have done so much damage to society that you can't begin to start to talk about it. Then now we're seeing some prosecutions about all the fraud that was going on from the money that they stole. Well, they essentially stole it, even though it was given to them. But we cannot continue. We cannot continue. If we are to have a constitutional republic, we cannot continue like this, where we're tolerating violence and destruction and persecuting people trying to protect their private property. We can't do that.
Well, and people have tried to. I mean, you had this one case that you just mentioned from the video of the people protecting their private property and being prosecuted. But, people have tried to tie the Kyle Rittenhouse issue into an analogy with this too. But there is a big difference between Kyle Rittenhouse and Preddy. And the issue is that Kyle Rittenhouse was not going to a protest with a gun to confront law enforcement.
Right.
So that was not the issue. He was going there because he was worried that violent looters might start destroying shops of people that, you know, he knew and people in the
Yes.
community that they knew. And so they were trying to help defend those shops, kind of like the Korean store owners back in the Rodney King riots.
Rodney King riots, yes. Yes.
And they weren't nearly as active, right? I mean, they weren't firing wildly into the crowd. I mean, if you go back to the Rodney King riots, and you can see those guys up in those roof shops, and they were firing off some rounds up there. so and I don't recall that ever being, it's funny. I didn't recall that being as politically charged as
It was not.
those Korean store owners, but
Yes.
Kyle Rittenhouse was chased down by a left-wing pedophile with
Yes.
a skateboard, and somebody else who I think somebody else had a firearm too or something that was coming after
Well,
him.
he shot the guy. A guy approached him. I forgot the guy's name. Approached him, but one of the people he shot the guy arm off or near off or something like that. He had a handgun on him, and he was approaching Rittenhouse. I think Rittenhouse was on the ground, I think, or something like that. And he fired on him and got him on the hand, but he messed him up really bad. But the guy had a gun in him, and he was pointing at Rittenhouse.
And isn't it odd that the left did not care about that left-wing lunatic that was running around with a gun during, that was willing to use it on Kyle Rittenhouse, and Kyle Rittenhouse defended himself, but they were way bent out of shape that Kyle Rittenhouse had a gun.
Yeah.
And if you saw how Kyle Rittenhouse behaved when he left the protest area and the police were coming, through the outskirts of the protest area,
yes,
Kyle Rittenhouse confronted the police with his hands up and his not on his rifle, and
yes,
he was following whatever orders that they were saying, and of course they just wanted him to get out of the way because it was chaos in these situations. But so this is there's a massive difference there between the one story and there. But there is one other quick story that I wanted to bring up too, because it does bring up an issue of hypocrisy. But we had the issue of the Capitol police officer, Michael Byrd, who, during the protest at the Capitol, he shot Ashley Babbitt, who was unarmed, coming through the window of a door. And, he killed her. He shot her in the neck, I believe.
In the head.
Oh, it was in the head. Okay.
Yes.
Well, anyways, it was a fatal shot. And,
Yes.
and she died there, and she was unarmed. She was coming through an opening. And what did they do with him? They promoted him.
Yes.
They made him a captain. There was no question about whether or not it was okay. And of course, here, in this particular situation, where police were not supporting the ICE agents who were there, suddenly it's like, oh my God, how could you shoot a protester who actually happened to be armed, right? Even though he didn't present the firearm. So, these are really complicated things, and we're going to have to wait for some more evidence, I think, on this whole Preddy thing. But, the point is that there's an awful lot of hypocrisy going on out there.
On both in this particular case, on both sides, on the with this guy here, Michael Byrd, whose record is messed up with a whole bunch of various infractions that he had committed. I think in one case he might have lost his gun somewhere or some nonsense like that. But this
is
guy,
Michael Byrd, by the way, on the left, and this is Ashley Babbitt on the right side of the screen.
On the right side, yes. Yeah. And this guy took it upon himself to shoot this woman who was unarmed, shot her in the head, killed her on January 6th, and then he's celebrated as some kind of hero. He was saving lives and all this damn nonsense. But you could always count on the left to support the lunacy, because, of course, Mr. Byrd also has the right skin color to do this. And poor Ashley, she had the wrong skin color.
And the wrong hat color, too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So I can imagine how that combination might have enraged Mr. Byrd. and enough to fire that fatal shot that killed her. But he's celebrated as a hero. And then we had the Carl Rittenhouse case where everybody all the left wanted to run Carl Rittenhouse out of town and then get him in prison and all that kind of stuff. And all the man was doing was defending himself against some thugs. Okay, and now we had this case of Pretty in Minnesota. And okay, fine. I think there's enough doubt here to wait for the results of the investigation, and I'm willing to do that. And I think on both sides have gone off the rails on this so far, based upon what we have seen here tonight. We have the Trump administration, blah blah blah, telling us, it looked like he was about to fire or something nonsense like that. We have the left talking about, he was assassinated and all that kind of stuff and things like that. I just want everybody to calm down. But remember, this guy was interfering with a law enforcement operation. Even though he went there to help the woman to pick her up, the woman already made contact with the police officers. And if you got in the center of that, you are interfering with a law enforcement operation. So I just want them to be aware of that. And let's go forward and let's see where the investigation takes us.
By the way, one thing I did want to crow about just a little bit, because, I said this when Trump came into office, and, I don't recall hardly anybody else saying this, but I was definitely saying this. And it was when he said that he was going to go round up all these migrants, I was saying, oh my gosh. I mean, not like I have a big bullhorn. I mean, I'm on this show and I post on social media and that's about it. But, I said, look, go into the red states first. If you go into the red states, then you're going to have law enforcement, helping you there. You're going to have a lot of popular support, regardless of how you feel about, the immigration issue, period. The bottom line is that just would have tactically been smart, because then the news media would have been good on it. It's like what they're saying now. I mean, he is in red states and you're not seeing much news coming out of the red states on this.
Right.
You're seeing this whirlwind coming out of the blue states, and it's absolutely nuts. And the crazy thing is, if he would have done that and the word got out that they're working in the red states and not the blue states, where do you think all of the migrants would have moved to? They would have moved to the blue states. And then you would have had exactly the problem that Mayor Eric Adams was so upset about in the end of his term, which is, we have to feed them, we have to clothe them, we have to house them. This issue is going to destroy New York City, is what he said. And, it's like, all he had to do was play into that strategy. And I think things would be a lot more positive for him in the polls right now. Instead, massive controversy, and this may cost him the midterms.
Maybe I mean, I've not seen the polls on this lately, but this could be a big issue. This could be a big issue in the midterms that could swing against Trump and the Republicans. It is possible, even though Trump is doing exactly what he said he was going to do. He said he was going to deport these people. Fine. And a lot of us voted for him on that very issue. But this could cost him the midterm. It really could.
Yeah. But, and the crazy thing is, if these people would have all shown up and we started to see this pressure under Mayor Adams, where a lot of New Yorkers were starting to get upset that suddenly their kids' schools were housing migrants in their gyms and other places like that. I mean, there was just all kinds of chaos that was happening. Well, if the people in the blue states are all looking and they're seeing everything harmonious in the red states, and then they're looking around their neighborhood and they're saying, why is everything so crappy, here? That's what it takes to change minds, right? And, to get people to think a little differently. Instead, you go in there and now you've given them like a battle line and a cause, and it's just it's kind of tearing the country apart, I think. But
yeah, but once they get the sacrificial lamb, whether it's Renee Good or Alex Preddy, they're on their way to stardom. This is what happened. They're making these people into martyrs, and it's just like they did to George Floyd. I mean, maybe George Floyd was a horrible human being, I'm not saying he deserved to die the way he did, but he was a horrible human being. And he was committing a crime when he encountered Derek Chauvin. And I am, and maybe, early on, I have to admit, I jumped the gun and I thought he had done something so horrible. But I don't think he did, okay? He might have maybe kneeled for a little bit too long, but it was a legitimate police move that was used in, where did George Floyd, what city was it? What city?
Yeah, it was it was close to the same region.
Yeah, that's close to the same region. I can't remember exactly where it was, and I know it's right at the tip of my tongue. I just can't remember. But the point is, though, he might have stayed too long, so maybe he deserves some punishment for it. But it was a legitimate police move, okay? And I'm not sure he really was on Floyd's neck. But once the left finds a martyr, George Floyd or Renee Good or Alex Pretty, once they found a martyr, then they're on their way. This is how they gain stardom. This is how they get the creds, shall we say. And they just move on from there. And then a year later, after lives have been lost, cities destroyed, maybe even representation in Congress have changed hands. A year after that, a year and a half later, then we get to the truth. Then and only then, after they have done the damage.
Yeah. Well, and certainly, I think most people realize that a lot of perspectives were a little bit skewed during that whole George Floyd incident. I mean, I remember our minds even changed from a few weeks after we first saw it to suddenly, more things started coming up. And I think we started to all shift on the show into different positions because we were all in slightly arguing positions back when Tim was on the show. and I think we all had some different takes, and we started to realize that the portion that was shown on the news and a lot of things that were coming out, in the media, and from even in the court situation, there was just so much incredible bias that you couldn't get an honest representation. I mean, I didn't really. I was it took me seeing like an entire, I think 30 or 40 minutes of footage from, George Floyd in the store and the entire thing of him out on the street and being interviewed by the officers at first, and then they tried to put him in the car and he didn't want to get in the car. He said he couldn't breathe.
Exactly.
On the ground because he wouldn't get in the car and he wanted out of the car because he said he couldn't breathe. So, I mean, there's a lot at play there. And, they made it sound like, just the crazy police tried to execute him, from the get-go. So there's and I don't want to relitigate that whole thing here because we need another 2 hours. That was a tough one, but I do think it's time though for our Knucklehead Noise Patrol, and that is also from Minnesota as well, and it all has to do with, once again, the political characterization of what is happening there, and I think nobody can characterize it better than Tim Waltz. So here we go.
We have got children in Minnesota hiding in their houses, afraid to go outside. Many of us grew up reading that story of Anne Frank. Somebody's going to write that children's story about Minnesota. And there's one person who can end this now.
The left never misses an opportunity to always compare the Trump administration to the Nazis, and it's getting tiresome, especially for people who've actually been impacted by the Holocaust, like maybe the folks at the Holocaust Museum.
The U.S. Holocaust Museum isn't too fond of his remarks. The museum spoke out against the Democrats' politically charged statements referencing the Holocaust, saying this on X: Anne Frank was targeted and murdered solely because she was Jewish. Leaders making false equivalencies to her experience for political purposes is never acceptable. Despite tensions in Minneapolis, exploiting the Holocaust is deeply offensive, especially as anti-Semitism emerges.
So there you go. It's Tampon Tim again.
Tampon Tim again. This buffoon was almost vice president of the United States. God help us. that woman was the woman I was speaking about. The last word she said emerges, but the last word is really surges.
Surges, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Okay. But Tampon Tim, who can't get his analogies right, seems to think that people who are here illegally are somehow equivalent to the Jewish people who was escaping Nazi Germany. So I guess in his analogy, that make the Trump administration and ICE make them the Hitler and the Gestapo. So and the illegal immigrants who are here, migrants who are here, they are just like the Jewish people trying to escape the atrocities of those horrible people known as the Nazis.
Yeah, Leon, I don't recall Hitler offering every Jew $2,000 and a plane ticket to leave.
To leave, exactly.
I mean, it's not quite 1-to-1.
Yeah. Well, in Tampon Tim's mind, yes, of course it will. Anything could be 1-to-1. Anything.
Yeah. Well, anything could be a Nazi in Tampon Tim's mind. when he wakes up in the morning, that's I guess he's just thinking about Nazis and how he's the hero against the regime or something.
I'm telling you, yes, he's gonna be like Schindler. You know, Schindler saved all those Jews. You know, even though he was German, but he saved all those Jews. I guess Tampon Tim is thinking he's going to be seen as Schindler. You know, we'll have Tampon Tim's list. You know, Tampon Tim's list where he saved all those illegal migrants from the horror of the Trump administration and his Gestapo, ICE.
It'll be Captain Tampon Tim of the Somali pirates, saving the Somali pirates from the cruel empire.
I think we had saving Private Ryan, so now we have saving Tampon Tim and the Somali pirates. Yes, there we go. Yes.
Well, watching this time didn't just cost you 1 hour; it cost you 2 hours. I hope it was worth it, but it takes a lot of time to make sense of the craziness of the world today. You got last thoughts, Leon, before we leave?
Well, I think we should end where we began, and I think Louis Brandeis was so correct that we cannot have the laws be violated at the whims of man. Because if we are to live in a constitutional republic where the rule of law shall rule, and the superior law here is our constitution, the superior law of the land, then we must get back to the day when the constitution rules the land. If we don't, we are on the pathway to anarchy, a place where none of us will want to be, where your neighbors will become your enemy at the drop of a hat if he or she feels he or she is offended by any action that you may take. We have to let the rule of law rule.
And one of the best ways to do that is to reduce the size and scope of government. Then not even government will wind up tripping over most of its own laws.
That's right. That's right.
Well, yes. If you're watching before our show next week, just try and think about what you can do in your neighborhood to advance the cause of liberty. I mean, we're seeing all these, people out there capturing fraud, just capturing video. I mean, how about that? What was it? The news movement, I think they're called, that just brought in that video of Preddy there and stuff for the discussion. So there's just all this stuff out there that you could do just to help move the ball for liberty in your community and to help wake people up, because boy, I tell you, if we don't do something, they're coming for your liberty. So do something or you're going to lose it. Until next time, stay tuned and stay free.
Oh, yes, indeed. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.